everybody. I'd like to welcome you to 2n1 Ministries today. I want to thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedules here at this Christmas and New Year's time to join us, and hopefully we'll have a lot of fun together, and hopefully we can engage with some conversation with you as we hear your questions coming back and some interaction with you. Today we are starting a new series called The Death of a Nation, and that might sound like kind of a depressing topic, but we thought, well, how applicable is this at this time in our history in the United States of America to study what causes a nation to rise or fall. And this book is also written by John Stormer, like our last Bible study was. I'd like to open up by sharing a verse with you from John. This is in John 8, verse 32. It says, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And that applies to us personally and as families, as young married couples, and as a nation. To start off with, I thought it was important for us to define a couple of terms as we begin. The first word that I would like to define is capitalism, and that is describing a free enterprise system, the way that our country was designed around the United States Constitution. So let me give you that definition. It is an economic system in which the means of production and distribution are for the most part privately owned and operated for private profit. And that's something that we have enjoyed tremendously in building our economy under Donald J. Trump, our current president. The second term I would like to define is communism. And communism uses intimidation, manipulation, and control. I know what communism is because my dad grew up in a communist country, and I would like to do a separate DVD and explain his story to you. But let me share the definition now. Communism, as developed by Lenin and many, many others, advocates seizure of power by a conspiratorial political party, maintenance of power during an interim period by stern suppression of internal opposition, as we have recently seen in Hong Kong, centralized public ownership of almost all productive property, and the sharing of the products of labor, and commitment to the ultimate goal of a worldwide communist state. Thank you for joining us again in our Bible study and in studying of the book, The Death of a Nation by John A. Stormer and our teacher, Todd Frederick.
Thank you, Heather, for that introduction. Glad to have you tune back in with us. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and then click the little bell. So that way you can get notification of our next upcoming videos. We felt it to be important to bring about this study as we are in a crisis in this nation, not just now, but going back, as we'll discover with our book here, that John Stormer had written back in 1968. And he was a historian. He had gotten a degree in history, and of course this was a best-selling book back in 1967 and 8, and he tells about, he opens it up with Daniel Webster foresaw the death walk which America is taking, and he wrote this. He warned about it in the 4th of July speech in Concord, Massachusetts in 1806. So that's a pretty slow death walk for over 200 years. Webster said, "When we speak of preserving the Constitution, we mean not the paper on which it is written, but the spirit which dwells in it. Government may lose all of its character, real character, its genius, its temper, without losing its appearance. Republicanism, unless you guard it, will creep out of its case of parchment, like a snake out of its skin. You may have despotism under the name of a republic. You may look on government and see it possesses all external modes of freedom, yet finding nothing of the essence, vitality of freedom in it. Just as you may contemplate an embalmed body, where art hath preserved proportion and form of it, amid nerves without action, and veins void of blood. So John, in comment to that, by Daniel Webster, he says, American people need the rebirth of political and spiritual principles, which were the, quote, nerves and blood of the revolution, or the republic, for almost 200 years. Of course, it's now been over 200 years. This book looks at what they were and what we have become. So we find that we have been at war, the chapter says, we've been at war with communism. And we start out in Psalm 9:17. It says, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. And another verse is Jeremiah 5:15, where the prophet says, Lo, I will bring a nation upon you from afar, O house of Israel, saith the Lord, which is a mighty nation. It is an ancient nation, a nation whose language thou knowest not, neither understandest what they say. And that's what happened to Israel, and that's what happens to nations that forget God. They get overtaken. And as we see now, there's a lot of, over the past 40 plus years, there's been commerce, importing, exporting of goods from China, for example. And so much now that China is buying out a large portion of companies. There was a guy the other day that told me about the company that he works for had just recently been bought out by China, by a Chinese, I guess, billionaire investor. And then there's, like with us, we like to, when we travel, stay at Country Inn Suites or Radisson hotels. They also had the Park Inn. A few years back, they were bought out by a Chinese group. So we're slowly seeing that this could be possibly the verse for us too, that that we'll be having a nation from afar come upon us, whose language is not what we know, and of course we don't know how to speak Chinese, so that could be very well it. We see that the embracements of communism in the United States has gone back as far as the 1940s. There's been a continual acceptance and embracement of it, and financing of it, and approval of it, all levels of whether it's Congress, the President, and this is and the Supreme Court. And this, we'll reveal that here in a few minutes. And this is primarily back in the late 50s, as it was becoming more and more acceptable in the in our halls of Congress and presidency and so forth. 2 weeks after Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy on the streets of Dallas, Texas, FBI Director Chief Edgar Hoover warned America these words: We're at war with communism, and the sooner every red-blooded American realizes this, the safer we'll be. And we need to see that communism is essentially our enemy. It's not our friend. You just ask anybody if they're still living. When they were taken over by Lenin and in Russia, that immediately everything changed for them. Religion was no longer acceptable. We're seeing that in America right now, where you got governors like Newsom and Cuomo and Governor Cooper in North Carolina, various ones that are saying you can't go to church, but you can have whorehouses and bars and all these places like that, abortion clinics open. But so there's an attack on religion right now, so that way everybody's kind of getting conditioned that, well, we can't go to church because it's going to be causing us to maybe get a virus. The problem is we got the sin virus, rampant, more now so than anything else. And also the isolation that people are experiencing, the suicide rate is just out of this world crazy. So what we need to realize is that we're at war with communism, and the sooner that we realize that, then better off we'll be, and safer. So much of this book was written, like I said, in 1968. Well, actually all of it in 67, 68. So you're going to be hearing, basically this is a history lesson of America that we didn't learn in school, because we always just learned about things centuries ago and stuff like that. And so this communism crept in more so because we were too busy studying other things, or like as we got older we got involved in this and that, working a job and so forth. But this is going to be a nice history lesson. And you think that some of the things that John Stormer wrote back then, which was in, like 52 years ago, was written like yesterday, is what we're facing now. He says the communists are waging their war against the United States on many fronts with a variety of weapons. Of course, at the time of this writing, the Vietnam War was going on, and so fire missiles and MiG fighters in Vietnam, and over here in the United States, filthy books and dirty movies, and burned draft cards were weapons in the communist war to corrupt America's youth. What do we have nowadays? We got pornography, we got insurrectionists, rioters, Antifa, Marxist-trained leaders that started Black Lives Matters, and so forth. So it's just the same thing. It's only that it's ramped up even more because it's become even more acceptable. The slow death walk that Webster talked about. So it goes on. Stormer says less spectacular but equally deadly battles are being fought with legal briefs before the Supreme Court of the United States. Now, one of the major ones that we lost in the United States just this past summer in July 2020 was that there should be an acceptance of homosexuals as a protected class status. Well, Supreme Court heard the case and sided with that they should be protected as well as nationality, sex, religion, and all those things. So the Supreme Court is instrumental in changing America and its landscape from what it used to be 100 years ago. And of course the Congress is sitting on their hands not doing anything either, because the Supreme Court in the United States, if they rule on something, and it makes it like a precedent, the Congress can actually sign a bill and basically nullify what they said in their decision, and then the president can sign it into law. But so far we don't have enough men and women with spine to do anything about these past laws that were passed. So J. Edgar Hoover issued this warning in December 1963. The warning about we're at war with communism. Since then, red bullets have killed 3 times more Americans in Vietnam than were killed in these 4 wars: the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican War, and the Spanish-American War combined. And you think about it, the thing that helps drive an economy that these warmongers like is we've got to start a war so that way we can have productivity start up. And so you'll see like the economy start to slump, and so they'll either create a war, like go to Iraq, and seek out Saddam Hussein and say that he has weapons of mass destruction, when really what he was doing is over there he's just bluffing everybody. And then George Bush goes in, starts a war, takes out Saddam, and under Saddam's, he wasn't a saint, but he's actually put into power originally from the United States. Took one guy out, put Saddam in, and trained him up nicely. But then he kind of didn't go along with the party line, so to speak, ideology of the United States. So he did allow for Christian freedom to take place there in Iraq. It was like 1 million Christians had freedom to worship and serve and go to church and all like that, serve God. But because the one world order, which was first coined by George Bush's father, he said the first time the mention of the New World Order. So we have this one worldism that is advancing itself, and it starts with communism. That way, if we can have everything, they say, in common, then all the wars will cease, and everybody will be content, and everybody have a chicken in the pot, and all that stuff.
Like I said earlier, we see that communism involves manipulation and intimidation and control. And about 2 weeks ago, an eyewitness from the state of Georgia testified in court about some of the election fraud, things that were not being done that should have been done, and vice versa. And now she is being threatened with people telling her, people sending her nude pictures and telling her that her children are going to be sexually abused, and threatening her whole family with their safety and with their very lives. Another man, a postal worker in another state, he was held for 4 hours behind a locked door, and they told him, we're trying to get, some kind of a forced confession out of you, but they didn't know that he was taping the whole thing. Anyway, they got him to sign some kind of a document. He didn't even realize.
So they're tracking what he said,
right? He didn't even realize what he was signing, and when they finally let him go, they blasted his signature all over the news media that says, look, this is what he said. He didn't really see that, or these things really didn't happen. So again, he did say that this was some of the same tactics that the Soviet Union used in their communistic ideas and to their people, and we're seeing it now here, sadly, in America.
Yeah, and the whole purpose, if you have the system of which government takes care of you from the cradle to the grave, then that means that they've got to have a lot of taxation coming in to pay for those things. So when, in the beginning of this, socialism, which then the next step is communism, sometimes it's quickly, like an overthrow, sometimes it's gradual. It's that way, it's almost like you're putting the frog in the pot and turning up the water. He's content until he realizes he's boiled and it's too late. But in the case of socialism, like when we went to Canada back in 2003 for some missionary friends' son's wedding. And when we was up there, the people were just like, oh yeah, this is great, socialism up here, and we have insurance paid and all like that, But what they don't realize is that in the beginning of it, it's fine because it's kind of like leeching off of the capitalistic system. And as their programs become more and more expensive, then they become more and more in control. And then they have to turn that control over to elimination of certain people, like if you are too old and Aunt Susie's just too far gone to where we don't want to keep having to put money into her. So they do probably like what Cuomo did up in New York. Got somebody with the Chinese virus. We'll put them over in the nursing homes. That way they'll get better. Well, what it did, it wiped out all the old people, which maybe those are people on pensions, New York State pensions. Maybe they were obviously taking from the income tax or the tax system to care for them. And so what happens is you start eliminating people that are in the way of the progress. That's a term we hear now too. The Democrats want progress. So these things here, you have to eliminate, in their mind, eliminate obstacles that will make the communism system work. So in other words, like in China, for years they had a one-child policy that the United Nations, I think it was, had told them that you have to do. If you're getting too big, you have to have one-child policy. So in the countries like the United States, we had no one-child policy, but then what they started doing is the Supreme Court in 1972 did the hearing of Roe versus Wade, and then passed the Abortion Act, which then allows for babies to be killed, which then takes those people out of the system before they're born, and then those who were already born, such as like in this era of time, in the 50s and 60s, of course in World War II and like that, all these wars were necessary in their eyes to be able to win some war over here and keep us free. But then those people are our boys and now recently girls that are being taken out of society through death. Or they may be over there, they're maimed, and they come over here and they're not much good. So then they shoot them up with vaccines, that way they can go over there and keep well, and they come back here and they have PTSD and all this depression and all this stuff. So it's working along fine with the one world system, thinking that we need to have a smaller Earth population, and therefore we can exist better as a people group.
I wanted to back up to the word that you said, progressive. Of course, the one worlders are saying that we are progressing if we kill the elderly or kill babies, but they're just redefining all the terms because God loves each one of us. Of course, that's why He sent His Son to die on the cross and be raised again, so that we could have an eternity in heaven when we trust in Him for forgiveness of sins in the blood of Jesus. But of course, they're calling good evil and evil good, and God tells us that the only way to progress is to choose life, not to do, killing. That is actually goes back to Baal worship. And
I read last night, I was doing some study for this thing, and I somehow saw an article that read a headline saying that this father and son up in Alaska a couple years ago, I'm not saying this is wrong or right, definitely seems wrong, but what they did, they were out bear hunting. Instead of shooting a bear that was, a target, like each one's going to get the other, and if they don't, one outsmart the other one. Well, he and his son crept up to this, I guess a hole in a tree or something like that. I couldn't quite tell what it was due to the picture. But there was a camera set up that, that the park rangers had done to kind of watch the hibernation patterns of these bears. Well, they crept up and shot the mother bear while she was hibernating. And then the two baby bears were in there too, and they shot them. They didn't know that it was on camera. And everybody online was just, oh, that's terrible, and like that. And I scrolled through probably like, I don't know, maybe 500 comments, and each one was talking about, yeah, they need to be killed themselves, and on and on it goes. I think I maybe saw 3 articles in there, 3 comments that somebody said, that's bad, but what about the babies that are killed in the mother's womb? I thought that's what I wanted to hear. That's bad that it's happened, but I want somebody to stand up for, okay, you have a bear and you have an infant. Everybody's crying about the bears, but the infants, preborn infants, are killed. So that's what we're talking about here. The value of society on life of humans is not there, and everybody lauds about the abortion rights and like that. And Margaret Sanger, that started it back in the early 1900s, specifically said that she wanted to have abortion, not abortion, but birth control, to help curb the population of the black people. And so you got Hillary Clinton that says Margaret Sanger, she's one of my mentors, and Hillary Clinton's a Democrat, and no doubt Margaret Sanger was too. But all the people of color love Hillary. And they were saying Hillary, Hillary, and all like that. But she was one who was advocating for the killing of black people through abortion, or preventing of them. Now they're killing them through abortion. So these wars, such as like the Vietnam War, it says, as these Americans died in Vietnam, firebomb throwing mobs in America, led by communist, agitated, and trained revolutionaries, killed over 150 people in America in 1967. You had the riots in 1967. Killed over 150 Americans, injured several thousand others, and destroyed property worth $1 billion in 100 cities. Now that wasn't during the summer of 2020, that was during the summer riots of 1967. So you can see how this communism has been creeping in and making America be on a slow death walk for decades. And so we have billions of dollars worth of property that was damaged this year. And notice what it said. John said back then, in 1967, these mobs were led by communist, agitated, and trained revolutionaries. Now, as I mentioned a while ago, you can look on Black Lives Matter's website, and you can see that it was founded by 3 black lesbian trained Marxists. Now, a Marxist is a communist, a follower of Karl Marx. So, when we see organizations coming together on the topic of racial issues, that was one of the main issues that was used by the communists back in the 60s, and is still being used today. Jesus said a nation cannot stand, a nation that is divided cannot stand. So Satan knows that, the communists knows that, and they know that if we can take race, as they call it, color, and use that as a wedge, then our nation will divide. So America's not winning the war with communism because America seems to be strangely unable or unwilling to face the facts that we are at war with communism. And here we have communist Bernie Sanders, who is an independent senator in Massachusetts, or New Hampshire, one of those states. But anyway, he's a communist, and he came in with his communist ideologies, and because he did so well against Hillary Clinton, but got beat, and then he came back in the second time, his communist progressive message was resonating with the students and young people. And we'll get into that in a minute. So America's losing the war with communism because the president, then President Johnson, the Congress, and Supreme Court won't decide which side they're on. Which side are you on? You on capitalism, Constitution, freedom, of which this country is founded on, or are you for communism? They're not making a decision either way. They're not drawing a line in the sand and saying, we're for capitalism. And that was unbelievable, he says. Consider this strange sequence of events.
They also say there's no class in a communistic country. But that's a big fat lie, because the people at the top, the communist leaders, they are filthy rich, they have everything and anything they want, and then everyone else is their little slaves, and they have nothing, and they're poor as paupers. So there are 2 classes, 2 specific classes under communism: the extremely wealthy and the extreme paupers.
Yeah, I guess that's what it says in Revelation chapter. I can't remember which chapter it is, but it says that the Antichrist will be making whosoever wants to work and buy and sell and like that to receive a mark of the beast in his hand or in his forehead, whether they be rich or poor, bond or free. And that's the communistic system there. You're going to be high up making all the money, or you're going to be the slaves because they don't believe in capitalistic venture and so forth. So we're running out of time here. We will probably have to pick up this last little bit next week. But just a quickie here is that in 1965, Lyndon Johnson was the president, and he did more in the way of destroying this nation's young people through the war than you believe. So thanks for watching. Tune in next week for this next exciting portion of study.